I've got a great Saturday morning job. Now, as a carpenter, I like to sort of like be busy all week and then at the weekend spend a little bit of time getting ready for the next week. In this case, I unboxed a new saw. This is the 36 volt battery table saw from Hikoki. It's a really good size saw. This is a saw which is portable, albeit it's a big enough saw to carry out some really big tasks as well. So the first thing I'm going to do though, before I even start using this, before I even set the battery in it, is literally go through it and check its tolerances and just make sure everything is nice and tight. The last thing I'll be doing whilst checking this saw out, the very last thing I'll be doing is putting the battery in, okay? That is the very final thing. We do not do any work on it with the battery in. So mostly everything on the saw is factory set up, but what I'm going to do is some basic checks. For example, I'm going to take off the blade cover. I'm just going to have a look at the blade, make sure it's spinning freely, make sure that nothing in transit fell inside, so the first time I turn it on it gets spat out at me. I'm going to check the riving knife, make sure it's nice and straight. I'm also going to set the fence up, so I'm going to set the fence up onto its factory fitted lugs. These lugs are actually like an Allen bolt that fits to the front and back carriage. There's two sets of these because you can sort of open the saw up and cut on the second scale. There's two scales here, one for more close-up cutting and one for cutting further away. I'm going to set that up as well. I'm also going to make sure that 0 is 0. So what I mean by that is when I want to cut 10 millimeters, 15, 20, whatever, it's exactly that. Okay, so there is some fine tuning to do on the actual slide here. So where the carriage comes through, I want to make sure that that is exactly at 0. I want to also make sure that the slide fence here is parallel to the blade. So there's a simple way of working that out, and that the saw, when it's upright at 0, it is at 0. This saw will do an angled cut round to sort of 45, 46 degrees. So I want to make sure that 0 is 0 because there are some fine tolerances, fine adjustments that you can do. But generally speaking, out of the box, you don't really have to do a great deal to it. So what I do with my sort of chop saw is something very similar. I just make sure that my square is still square from both fences, using a spirit level sometimes, and a piece of timber, so you cut it, reverse it, check it, and make some fine adjustments. I haven't got much to do on that, to be honest, so we're going to concentrate now on the table saw. I'll show you around it and I'll show you exactly what I intend to do. So just familiarising ourselves with the saw, as I say, it's Hikoki's 36 volt table saw, and it is a battery saw. However, there's a mains adapter for it, which is particularly useful if you're going to be doing so much work and you've got access to power that you can plug it in as well. So I think that's super useful. So looking at it, here is the on-off switch. So you can simply press to go and stop. So it's quite positive. You know, you've got your on button there and you've got something quite big. You haven't got to kind of struggle to find where the off switch is. I particularly like that. You just touch it and it's off. Here is the rise and fall of the blade. So this wheel actually turns the blade, brings the blade up, brings the blade down. On the same mechanism there, you've also got your angle for the blade, so you can basically set the angle of the saw by unclamping and taking it around. And you can see here that that is also something we're going to have a little look at and make sure that's nice and true there. There's a tiny bit of adjustment on that. Okay, so the battery compartment is to the left here. The battery simply slides in, and there are the blade spanners that look a bit like a skull and crossbone there. I particularly like that there. Now, the saw is actually bolted to the stand, so it's kind of a fixture. You can use the saw off the stand, but I prefer to keep them on the stand. I think they're nice and sturdy, nice and safe. On the other side, we've got these nice safety guards which go over the top of the riving knife for different applications. You've got one there which has got the jaws on it, and get in there, which is like the anti-kickback stuff. And here is the parallel slide fence, which I've got just resting here at the moment. And of course, a push stick. You have a push stick which fits into this little garage compartment there. So all in all, it's fairly straightforward. The fence works on a rack and pinion which is attached front and back, so that obviously just pulls through. It's fairly straightforward. So the first thing I'm going to do is have a look in the blade compartment, make sure there's nothing in there that's going to fly out when we first put it on. Also check that the riving knife and the blade are nice and true too, so we'll open that up and check that. So you can see here that there's a small lock, £1 coin, something like that, and obviously turn it to unlock. There's a little finger hold here, and you can just pull this out and set that to one side. Now it looks like it's plastic, but it's actually cast aluminium, so that's quite a nice bit of kit. And then what I'm going to do is literally first visually inspect everything, make sure that the riving knife is nice and secure, nice and straight. We'll raise the blade up so we can expose it. I'll take it all the way up to the top. And this way I can just check that everything's nice and secure. You know, you never know that the blade is going to be absolutely 100% put on perfectly as well in the factory, but it's best to just have a look at that and check. Now, obviously, being careful and pulling the blade towards you, you can literally just sort of see how she rolls. Now, this has got a brake on it, so when it turns off, it shuts down. That's basically what you can hear there. And you want to have a look through and just check the riving knife is nice and straight. So if I just give you an idea, it's a bit hard to see with the light coming in, but the riving knife should be nice and in line there. Now, of course, you can check that as well. So using a straight edge, you can just carefully take a straight edge along the side of the blade, just touch everything together and just check and see exactly how it all lines up with the riving knife. And you can see that that is nice and true. I can check that on the other side as well. Sometimes you'll find that the riving knife has got some play in it, okay? And that's basically just because of the nature of what we've got there, okay? But that's all nice and true, so I'm pretty happy with that. I've also looked inside to make sure that there's nothing in there from transit when it was packaged and shipped that's going to come flying out, and that the dust port at the very back at the bottom there, see the light coming through right at the bottom, is nice and clear too. So on paper, that is all pretty good. There's nothing wrong with that. The blade is spinning freely in both directions. Now, by the looks of things, the riving knife has got its own quick release, which I particularly like. I've got another table saw, and you have to use a tool for that to get it out, and it's a bit more of a faff. So let's have a little look and see how easy that comes out. You can see the riving knife here, and there's also a lever here. It will pull back towards me, and there we have unlocked the riving knife. In fact, that's quite nice because you've got different riving knife heights there as well. So you can come up and you can also set it downwards as well. So you can have it fully over the top, or indeed you can set it at level 1 as well. And I'd imagine that that's quite useful when you want to do rebating as well. So you've got the different options to set it up right over the top and come all the way back down. That's a really nice feature, that is. So whilst I've got it in the up position, let us try some of the attachments for that riving knife. Here we have got an attachment here to make sure that everything's fully covered and safe. It's just a matter of slotting in the back slot and letting it click in. You can then easily remove that. Simple stuff, and it goes back into its little holder on the side of the saw. Then we've got this other device. It's your anti-kickback. What that does is obviously stop the wood from kicking back at you. So here's the whole setup. There's the anti-kickback and the guard at the front. Now there is the setup of the riving knife with all the guards, the anti-kickback as well. So once we're happy with the blade, I'm going to set the riving knife into a lower position and pull up the lever. Set it down into a lower position there. That's position 1, which allows us to do rebates, and we will replace our cover. So then what we want to do is set up our parallel fence. Okay, it's the first job I like to do. Once I know the blade's all nice and safe, here's the parallel fence. This is the little factory lug which fits in that groove, which is put on. We're going to drop that over front and back. Once we're happy that they're in the right position, lock it off. Okay, so we've put it in as per the factory. Now I'm going to take the blade as high as I can take it, and then what I want to do is take over the fence using the wheel all the way over until it touches the fence. That is 0. So then what I need to do is to check how close that is to 0 on our scale. This is where we need to check it, right here. Now at the moment, it's not far off 0. I'd expect that straight out of the factory, but what I'm going to do is just loosen these off a tiny bit. And you can see that there's a fair amount of play in these adjustment screws here. We'll just loosen them off a tiny bit. And that gives us all this play. So I know at the moment we're on 0, so I'm just going to make sure that all lines up to what I'm happy with. And then we're going to tighten that up. And then that is 0. So the first test we'll do is actually make sure we'll do some cutting at any measurement, and we'll be able to check that as well from what we consider to be 0. The other thing I can do at this point is check the saw blade for upright. So if I come around and look at it here, straight away I'm going to look at the blade and the parallel fence, and it all looks pretty good. Okay, you'd know if it wasn't dead on, you'd see it. So if I just unclip this, just take that away for a minute, and you can kind of see that everything's nice and parallel. So what we're actually looking for, it's a bit obscured here, is you can see that here we've got our angle. And what's really nice is that this is also on a rack and pinion, so it's very easy to turn to bring the actual blade over to our set parameter, so 45 degrees in that instance. So this is a really nice feature of this saw. So I'm going to start that on 0, of course, there. I'm going to lock that off here, and I'm going to check that at the top, and that all looks pretty nice. So I'm really happy with the way the saw's set up. Everything's good. I've checked everything over. I'm going to pop a battery in. I've got a full battery here, so this is all ready to go. This is an 8 amp hour at 18 volt, or it's a 4 amp hour at 36 volt. So the blade we know is spinning freely. I'm going to pull out the support at the back as well. This is a really useful feature on this saw, especially if you're working single-handedly. You've actually got, it's another pair of hands. It's going to give you a little bit more leverage for when you're doing the rips, especially if you're using some heavyish material. So I'm going to cut through some MDF. I always think that's a really nice way of checking a saw. I'm going to set the blade down. When using a table saw, a bit like using any kind of saw, you want to make sure that you're not over cutting on the depth. You want to make sure that the depth is set for 2 reasons. The first reason, you don't want to slide your thumb accidentally across it if you get your fingers too close and cause a lot of damage. A lot of injuries happen on these types of saws. So what you're doing there is you can see that the blade is just above the top of the riving knife. So this is ideal for rebating as well, which is really nice. The first thing I'm going to do is I've got a nice parallel section of MDF here. I've got a nice board edge on it. I'm going to run the board edge against parallel fence. I'm going to check that it all runs through nicely, that I haven't got to make any adjustments to these little lugs, the factory fitted lugs, which you can undo with an Allen key, move slightly and do back up. So we're going to run this MDF through, then we're going to measure it and check our measurements from our scale here. So I've got this set at 30 millimeters. That's what I want to cut there. Then we'll fine tune it if we need to. So I've done my first ever cut with this saw, so it was battery in, and we've put this through. Now straight away what I'm looking for is for this piece of timber to slide really freely against the parallel fence. I mean, it absolutely feels perfect. So the riving knife's in the right position, the kerf's really good on the blade. I mean, that's beautiful, that. And then what we're going to do is check that for width. So I've got my scale set about 31, I'd say. So we want to make sure that our timber is the same. So let's see what that measures there. This is to the cut side, obviously. And I would say that isn't bad. Let's just have a look at our scale here. And let's have a look at our... If anything, I think we are slightly bigger. So what we need to do is just adjust the fence slightly. We're going to try that again. We'll run that through again at 20 millimeters and we'll check that. Let's see how that looks. Now if we just check what that looks like there. We've got around about 21 there. You can kind of just see that's just slightly over. So we just want to fine tune it a little bit to make sure we can get back to where we need to be. So to do that, we need to readjust our slider here. So where we've got that on 20 millimeters, yet the cut's at 21, we simply undo the 2 screws here and here, and we'll just take that across to 21. It's as easy as that. We know that the saw to the parallel fence is cutting at 21 millimeters, okay? We know it's cutting there to the blade at 21. So we will set our slider now at 21 and we know that we're all good. So it's a matter of loosening off the screws, adjusting it slightly. We'll just take that on to 21 there. Give that a tighten up. And we'll give that another go. This time we'll just take any measurement. Let's go for 40 millimeters there. Let's just check that. And I would say that is pretty good at 40 millimeters. And that is absolutely spot on. Let's check it with my tape measure. And you can see again, we've got a really nice 40 millimeters. So I now know that everything's true, nice and parallel, and all in good working order. So that is the saw fairly set. I want to just show you one feature with this, which is the fact that we've got that low riving knife. Now what does that mean? That means that normally if a riving knife is set on the back of the saw and it's too high, we can't form a basic rebate. But with this machine we can. So what we'll do is we'll move this out of the way. We'll get ourselves a little bit of softwood. And we will form a basic rebate. So we'll reduce the blade down here and we'll just take it in a bit here. And let's say we were making a small rebate. Find ourselves a nice bit of timber. What that's given us is a really nice rebate. So it's removed a square section. And what's really nice about this is some saws on the market won't allow you to keep a riving knife in to do that. But what they've got there is the 3 different settings here, is when we put that, let's just whip the battery out there, just in case there we go, take the battery out. So what that gives us is the fact that the blade is set slightly above the riving knife. So it does give you the ability to form a rebate, which is an absolute bonus with a portable saw like this. So in conclusion, I've spent a couple of hours this Saturday morning literally just going over the saw, familiarising myself with it, just checking everything, being a bit geeky really, I suppose. Put it all together, which is fairly straightforward. It's no more than about a dozen bolts to actually attach the saw to the legs, put the wheels on the legs, add some of these extra rails on, the things that you sort of carry and hold it by. And it's fairly straightforward. I've worked everything out, so now I'm pretty confident every time I get it out to use it. I know where everything is, how everything's gonna work. I've worked out the riving knife, how we can raise it and lower it just by using a simple coin to take out the cover and release the riving knife. Obviously, I'm doing all of this with the battery out. I can't stress that enough. We've worked out how to switch it on and off safely. We've worked out all of the different parts. We've got our parallel guide, nice and parallel, everything's set, so 0 is 0. Also on the upright as well, it's perpendicular, so it's 90 degrees to this. And I think it's well worth investing a little bit of time when you get a new tool, any tool, into sort of its workings and just making sure everything is 100%, because these things have been manufactured somewhere, then they've been transported, they've been delivered, they've been handled, you've handled them, and the chances are something may have just got knocked slightly. So it's really worth just going over everything, checking everything out, making sure you understand all the safety features, where everything is, and also what you should and shouldn't do. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. As I say, it's a nice little Saturday morning job, just familiarising myself with the saw. I'm looking forward to putting it through its paces.